My name is Dr. Gregory Sherwood, and I've been asked to say a word or two about beginning and succeeding in the co-curricular course on C.S. Lewis. First of all, let me thank you for choosing to take this course. C.S. Lewis is, for many of us, one of the greatest authors of all time. And that's a rather, that's a big statement to make about anyone, but it's true in the sense that he wrote across all genres. He was a poet, he was a playwright, he was a futurist, he was a dreamer, he was a novelist, he was a philosopher, he was a theologian. He was all of these things wrapped up into one person. And once he grabbed hold of the fact of his faith, which was rather later in his maturation process. He was 32 at the time. And he was brought to faith by J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, who was a generation older than Lewis and one of his best friends throughout his life. He was brought to faith by this man, and having been brought to faith, the whole character of his writing changed. It deepened and it broadened in the terms of the subject matter that he was willing to consider, and in the way that he wrote about fundamental truths that he, in fact, wrote in The Abolition of Man, an essay, rather long essay, but reading in one sitting, readable in one sitting. The Abolition of Man tells us how the society is jettisoning the notion of absolute truth for relativism, and as a result is losing its humanity. We see this thematically in Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Many of his novels deal with the battle between good and evil, and it's evil's job to take out from under us the sure foundation of the absolute truth. Every year there's a survey that goes out to over 1,000 seminaries and theological colleges, asking them to name the most influential or most important theological thinker of all time. And Lewis is one year after year. He's going up against the most important theologians in history. For example, Augustine and Aquinas, and any of the modern day theologians who in many ways can't hold a candle to those people. They're too caught up in the cultural issues of the day, which they would argue is their job, making God relative to culture. Lewis saw it as the other way around, that God is the one who sets culture. God is the one to whom we cling and who defines who we are, not the culture in which we live. So you've chosen to read and work in this area in C.S. Lewis and his contemporaries as well. Whoever's facilitating your co-curricular class, whatever teacher you've got, has lots of leeway to pick which works you're going to read and how you're going to work through them. There's some basic stuff, though, that we're going to use for all of these courses. We're going to ask you to consider, how does Lewis develop his characters? We're going to ask you, how does Lewis develop his plots? We're going to ask you to consider the values and beliefs that he is using to illuminate his characters. And we're going to ask you to consider the primary aspect of the characters being, what are they all about? And then we're going to ask you to consider the secondary effects of your interaction with them. The primary bit is the author's doing. That's Lewis writing deliberately about what his characters are like. But then when you read them, you come up with your own model, which is the secondary part, and that's the effect that those characters are having on you. Let's agree to a couple of principles too before we get started here. Let's agree that our thinking leads to our emotion, not the other way around. Lewis would agree with that. What we think is what we become. It's said that as believers, people can bring out of the spiritual world and make real that which was not, making that which was not become that which is. Certainly an author does that when he or she creates a character. And that's exactly what Lewis is doing, of course, and masterfully doing in the works that you're going to read. So going back to the idea that we were just discussing, it's thinking and knowledge that creates emotion. And so we are sometimes at the effect of what we read and what we interact with that which we interact, and especially as it relates to things in our society. For instance, I wonder what Lewis would have to say about social media. Arguably, social media is neither good nor bad. It's just media. What goes over it is what makes it good or bad. I'm not sure that he would agree with that, not least because of the secondary effects in our society. What would he say? What would he think about someone who was addicted to playing computer games? He could easily create, can you imagine a character created by Lewis who was addicted in such a way, being somehow involved with the principal characters in the Narnia Chronicles? And what might they be like? You get the idea. These aren't far-fetched ideas either, as you read through and think about what Lewis is writing and how he's developing his characters and his plots. In that sense, they're timeless because we can take those models and we can insert the very things that we're currently involved with. That's one of the principal purposes of discovering who he is. So you're starting out, you may not know who he is at all. And so one of the ways to be introduced to him is to read from the Space Trilogy. Yes, he wrote a space trilogy, science fiction. That Hideous Force is the third book in the Space Trilogy. And it's a story about a small town and a village near it that has been in Wales that is dealing with the legend of Arthur. And there are two antagonists in the story that are demonic and are trying to subvert everything that is going on in that world to turn what is good into evil. And the way that Lewis develops this shows you a good deal about what he thinks we're capable of doing. Mind you, much of what he has to say about good and evil, I think, comes from three sources. first of all, he was a participant in World War I and saw the horror of the trench warfare there. Second, he was, as I said earlier, a good friend of J.R.R. Tolkien. And Tolkien had a real handle on evil. I mean, if you have read The Lord of the Rings and The Return of the King, you know that final fight sounds an awful lot like Armageddon in the book of Revelation. And the way it was staged in the most recent movie makes it look that way as well. Tolkien understood good and evil, and I think he and Lewis talked about it a good deal. You can see that not only in Narnia and in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. You can see it in the Screwtape Letters, where Lewis actually delves into and assumes the mind of evil. Fascinating. You can assume also, as you come to know more about Lewis, about what's going on with his friends, his friendships, the people with whom he would discuss what he was about to write, or would discuss as he was writing the ideas as they linked together. There was a group of people called the Inklings. These Inklings, they were the people who relied on each other to get an inkling of what they were going to write about. That just the beginning spark of an idea, the beginning point in your intuition that says there's something that really could be quite good if I developed it right. And I'm sure the Inklings had something to do with, even a lot to do with Screwtape Letters. Dorothy Sayre especially. Dorothy Sayre is, of course, most famous or most widely known for Lord Peter Wimsey, her noble sleuth, her detective. She wrote a great detective story, series of them. But she also is an incredible theologian. She wrote a book called The Mind of Our Maker, in which she had kind of an ongoing dialogue with a gentleman named G.K. Chesterton in its development. And you can see that in the book, but you can also see how some of what she had to say was influenced by and probably influenced C.S. Lewis. Another dear friend of Lewis's was a fellow named Austin Farrer. His relationship with Lewis is not just looked at, well known. Farrer was a brilliant man, a contemporary of Lewis's. He had an earned Doctor of Divinity from the University of Oxford, which means he did seminal work, original work. He had to do original work to get the degree in two different fields of faith. And he chose biblical studies and philosophical theology, and was incredibly accomplished at both. I believe, knowing Austin Farrer, knowing his work, and having studied actually him when I was at Oxford, walking through Keble College, he was the warden of Keble College for 6 years. Just being in the rooms, being in the place where he lived, you get a sense of deep understanding about the man and what he may have contributed to Lewis. All of these things are on offer to you as you look at his work. Now, we have choices that you can make about what you want to read. I've given a complete list to the school and made some recommendations about what the facilitators might want to choose. But the facilitator may, being familiar with one of the works that aren't there, pick another, which is fine in terms of giving you an introduction. And especially, I mean, when you stop and think about it, in a way, this is kind of like an ELA art class, but it's not. It is, because we're going to use a lot of the systematic way of looking at literature that you're learning there. But when we start talking about character development and plot development, those have their place in your education in English and language arts. But this is different. This is about your interest in this fellow, C.S. Lewis, and his particular methods. And he uses different ones in different works, by the way. It's as if he were doing a mind experiment or thinking through different ways of developing somebody's character. Again, I said this earlier, keep in mind, when an author develops a character, they're beginning from scratch. It's as if they were the creator and the character was the created. We are, after all, endued with the imago Dei, the image of God. We can create in our own way something from nothing, although we can't begin from something elemental. An artist can begin with a white sheet of sketch pad or a blank canvas and create a masterpiece. Someone like C.S. Lewis could sit down at the typewriter and in an hour have produced a world-class poem or the outline for his next novel, or who knows what might have flowed out of that incredible mind. That's what we want you to discover about C.S. Lewis. We could, I suppose, make him the topic of your literature courses very easily. But what we're offering here is we're trying to match your commitment to do something above and beyond your coursework to discover more about this incredible mind and his legacy to us of all of this written material and all of these different genres. So as you approach it, perhaps you'd like to discuss with your facilitator, with the teacher that's facilitating your particular co-curricular class, which choices you have to begin. I recommend that you think seriously about The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, because there you can get some idea of how he develops Aslan. Why the wardrobe? Why this incredible portal between worlds? I mean, isn't that witchcraft? I mean, how does that work exactly? And then there's a witch in there too. I mean, what's the difference between him and Harry Potter in that case? Rowling, the author of Potter, in some ways copies, not as in plagiaristically, but I mean, some people say that the most sincere form of flattery is to copy someone. She is noticing the success, I'm sure, that C.S. Lewis has had with a specific model of myth. A myth being a story that conveys value and basically takes us out of where we are and takes us somewhere else. But her source for her stories were, in fact, not the same as C.S. Lewis's. In fact, they're the other side. So when Lewis talks about these things, he's referring to the stories that we've had from generation to generation that plug directly into the sources that provide us with a sense of the good, not beginning with something that's basically evil and trying to make it appear to be good. There's a big difference. So approach your teacher and ask to talk about a list of books, a bibliography that you can read, and then talk about some objectives that you want to accomplish in reading them. And set some goals for yourself with your teacher. You know, I want to understand the principal characters. I want to understand how Lewis develops them. I want to understand how that fits into the plot. And you can take it from there. I promise you a rich experience. I promise you that you will come out the other side of this with a much deeper understanding and appreciation for literature in general and C.S. Lewis in particular. If there's anything we can do to help you, of course we will. I would log on to Google Classroom or get your teacher to invite you to Google Classroom. We have there some videos for you about C.S. Lewis's life, and we have the bibliography as well. And having done that and taken a look at some of the videos, I'm sure you're going to go off on YouTube and find some videos for yourself, because much of what he's written has been YouTubed, so to speak. Most of what he's written is obviously copywritten. It's not in the public domain. So it's still copywritten, not in the public domain. And so while you can get a DVD or get DVDs where movies and narratives have been produced, they usually cost. There are YouTubes available besides the one we've posted that talk about C.S. Lewis's life and his work. In fact, many of them. So I encourage you to use that route as well as you're reading. Try to be systematic in your reading. Try to set aside some time. You have, your schoolwork to do. You have other things that you have to accomplish besides this co-curricular course. So you have to be pretty deliberate to get your reading done and to enjoy the reading and then the discussion with your teacher. Pardon me. So that's all for now. I would hope that you will email me, Dr. Gregory Sherwood, at gsherwood@newmanacademy.org if you have questions or comments. And I sincerely hope that you enjoy and become very familiar with one of the greatest minds of our history. Thank you. Bless you.